There is a plant you only need to seed once, then harvest forever. A superfood hiding in plain sight, erased not because it failed, but because it thrived too well. Forgotten by design, this root defies drought, cold, and capitalism. So why don't you know about this? There was a time when this humble root fed entire nations. Indigenous communities cultivated it for centuries, knowing its quiet power. European settlers clung to it through winters, wars, and famine. It never failed them. But when food became business, its wild, ungovernable nature made it dangerous. It couldn't be patented. It couldn't be owned. It grew too easily, spread too freely, fed too many, without needing the system. So they erased it. Not with fire, but with silence. It was renamed, stigmatized, dismissed as peasant food, and quietly removed from the agricultural canon. The Jerusalem artichoke wasn't forgotten because it failed. It was buried because it succeeded. If you want to know more about the super plants that they have been hiding from us that serve people, not profits, subscribe, because the future of farming may be hiding in the forgotten roots of our past. Its name is Helianthus tuberosus, but you might know it, if at all, as the Jerusalem artichoke, sunroot, or sunchoke. It is not from Jerusalem. It is not an artichoke. It is the underground tuber of a sunflower native to North America, where it once covered fields from the Great Plains to the Atlantic coast. But they hid it from us. Before corn was king, before wheat fed empires, this sunflower's root fed generations. Long before European contact, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and many other indigenous nations cultivated it as a perennial food staple. It required no tilling, no replanting, just presence, patience, and respect for cycles older than agriculture itself. When French explorer Samuel de Champlain encountered it in the early 1600s, he saw a crop unlike any in Europe. He called it Canada's white truffle, nutty, sweet, nourishing, and absurdly easy to grow. European botanists rushed to classify it. Settlers carried it home like a prize. For a brief moment, it was the darling of two continents. But while other crops were domesticated to obey, the Jerusalem artichoke refused control. Its wildness was its strength, and its curse in the eyes of industry. Long before fences divided land, before seeds were patented, before agriculture bent under the weight of profit, the Jerusalem artichoke thrived across the forests, rivers, and prairies of what is now North America. To the indigenous peoples of this land, it was not just a food, it was a partner in survival, a seasonal ally embedded in the rhythms of the earth. They never called it Jerusalem artichoke. That misnomer was a European invention. They knew it instead through names that translated to sunroot or earth sunflower, names born from familiarity, not confusion. Among the Haudenosaunee, Iroquois Confederacy, the tuber was cultivated alongside corn, beans, and squash, the famed Three Sisters, though it held a different role. While the Three Sisters formed the spiritual and nutritional backbone of their polycultural fields, the sunchoke was the quiet fourth sister, growing beyond the garden plots, sometimes naturalized at the edge of settlements or along rivers. It was insurance, a perennial food that required little intervention, returning each year like a memory. The Lenape and other eastern woodland tribes prized it as both food and medicine. Roasted, boiled, or sun-dried for winter, the root was an abundant source of energy, especially when other harvests failed. It was often left in the ground until the first frost sweetened it, the starches converting into inulin, a natural sugar that does not spike blood glucose. Even without refrigeration, the tuber stored well under soil and snow. This made it invaluable in lean times, especially during harsh winters or after colonial disruption. European colonists, upon arrival, encountered a land already domesticated, just not in the linear, hierarchical manner they recognized. When Samuel de Champlain first encountered the tuber among indigenous gardens in 1605, he described it with awe. A root like a truffle, excellent to eat, cultivated by the savages. His men took specimens back to France, and the plant spread rapidly across Europe, not through trade, but through replication. Once planted, it multiplied with stubborn generosity. By the early 17th century, the Jerusalem artichoke was growing in English, French, and Dutch gardens. John Goodyear, a British botanist, wrote in 1621 that it was one of the most excellent roots that may be eaten. For a moment, it seemed poised to become a major European food crop, but its abundance became its liability. It grew too well. Once introduced to a field or hedgerow, it was nearly impossible to remove entirely. This trait, prized by indigenous farmers, alarmed the monoculture-minded colonial systems. Back in the colonies, European settlers leaned on the tuber during times of hardship. It became a crop of last resort during famines, sieges, and long winters. During the brutal early years of Jamestown, when imported grain rotted and native maize ran low, settlers survived on what they could dig from the land, often sunchokes growing wild along the riverbanks. They may not have acknowledged it, but their survival depended on indigenous agricultural legacies. The plant resurfaced during every major period of instability. In New France and later Canada, it grew in missionary gardens and settler homesteads, often passed hand to hand without money, as a gesture of mutual aid. During the American Revolutionary War, when trade was disrupted and British blockades prevented the import of European staples, the sunchoke returned as a food of necessity. But it was in Europe, centuries later, that the plant would have its moment of quiet heroism. During World War I, food shortages ravaged much of Europe. With men gone to the front and farmland turned into trenches, hunger became a weapon. In France, Belgium, and Germany, the Jerusalem artichoke emerged from obscurity to fill the void left by potatoes and wheat. It grew where other crops wouldn't, on bombed-out fields, in backyards, on the margins. It asked little and gave much. It became a staple of wartime diets, not because it was ideal, but because it refused to die. The same pattern repeated during World War II. Under Nazi occupation, much of Europe again faced starvation. France, once rich with vineyards and wheat fields, found its agricultural system fractured. In Paris, under German control, the sunchoke became known as topinambur, a word that would become both lifeline and insult. The tuber, along with rutabagas, became synonymous with deprivation, with defeat. The Germans had taken the good food. What remained were the roots of survival. The irony is striking. A food that once symbolized abundance, independence, and natural resilience was reframed as a food of shame. People who had survived because of it later refused to eat it. They remembered the hunger, not the plant's generosity. After the war, the sunchoke vanished from most markets. Its name was a reminder of occupation. Its flavor, earthy, sweet, complex, was too tangled with trauma. A generation raised on scarcity rejected it outright. They preferred crops that came in packages from factories with government labels. And yet, in quiet corners, it never disappeared. In rural homesteads, in indigenous gardens, in the back lots of old French farmhouses, the sunroot waited. It continued to grow where it had always grown, along rivers, behind barns, in forgotten corners of memory. The Jerusalem artichoke's history is not just botanical, it is human. It tells a story of survival under siege, of knowledge passed hand to hand when systems collapse. It is a wartime ghost that fed the starving and a pre-colonial gift that nourished generations. The Jerusalem artichoke is a botanical paradox, wild and cultivated, delicate in flavor yet stubborn in the ground. It defies categorization not only in its name, but in its entire biological character. It is not an artichoke, nor is it remotely from Jerusalem. What it is, however, is a marvel of perennial resilience, an agricultural ally that asks for little and offers much in return. Beneath its tall, sunflower-like stalks, which can rise up to 10 feet under the right conditions, lies the true gift, a sprawling network of knobby, bulbous tubers that resemble ginger roots or oddly shaped potatoes. These tubers are the energy banks of the plant, and their ability to regenerate, regrow, and outlast annual competitors is nothing short of remarkable. Nutritionally, the Jerusalem artichoke stands apart. Unlike starchy roots, such as potatoes, which store energy as glucose in the form of starch, the Jerusalem artichoke stores its carbohydrates in the form of inulin, a long-chain fructose polymer. This is not to be confused with insulin, though its effect on blood sugar is directly relevant. Inulin is a soluble fiber, and while it's technically a carbohydrate, it behaves very differently in the human body. It passes through the upper digestive tract undigested and is fermented in the colon by beneficial bacteria. This process supports a diverse and healthy gut microbiome, a topic that modern medicine is only beginning to grasp in full. The implications of this are profound. For people managing diabetes, for those interested in low glycemic diets, or for anyone focused on digestive health, the Jerusalem artichoke is a near-perfect food. It does not cause blood sugar spikes. Instead, it feeds the invisible allies in our digestive tract, bifidobacteria, lactobacilli, and other beneficial microbes, strengthening immune response, reducing inflammation, and aiding in the absorption of nutrients. In a world dominated by hyper-processed sugars and low-fiber diets, the inulin-rich sunchoke offers a kind of nutritional rebellion, an unprocessed underground alternative to synthetic supplements and pharmaceutical fixes. The tubers are also rich in minerals, often deficient in industrial diets. Iron, potassium, phosphorus, and magnesium occur in meaningful quantities. Iron supports oxygen transport in the blood. Potassium regulates nerve signals and fluid balance. Magnesium, vital for hundreds of enzymatic processes, is too often depleted by stress and poor diets. Phosphorus, frequently overlooked, is essential for cellular energy transfer. Without it, every bodily function slows. All of this comes in a package that requires no chemical fertilizers, no irrigation systems, and no pesticides. But the nutritional story is only one facet of the Jerusalem artichoke's power. Its agricultural profile is equally, if not more, compelling. Plant it once, and it returns. Year after year. It spreads underground via rhizomes, naturalizing itself in almost any soil that isn't completely waterlogged. It tolerates drought with casual ease thanks to its deep roots that access moisture and nutrients far below the surface, sometimes up to 6 feet deep. This makes it invaluable in regions prone to water scarcity or where climate change is turning reliable rain patterns into chaos. Where corn curls in the sun and lettuce bolts into bitter memory, the sunchoke stands tall. It can thrive in marginal soils, sandy, rocky, slightly acidic, even compacted. Its roots will fracture hard earth, aerating the soil over time, inviting fungi and microbes into the ecosystem. In this way, it is not only a crop, but a restorative force. It heals the land it grows in, mending soil where industrial agriculture has stripped life away. It is also cold-hardy to a degree that surprises many modern farmers. Long after the first frost has blackened leaves and silenced other crops, the sunchoke remains intact underground. In fact, it gets sweeter after frost, as inulin converts more fully into fructose. This characteristic allowed indigenous communities and later settlers to use the earth itself as a storage chamber. No cellar required. The plant remains edible for months, hidden beneath the snow, available when everything else has withered. Its reproductive strategy is equally tenacious. The plant spreads by tubers, not seeds, and even the smallest missed fragment of root will produce a new plant the following season. For large-scale monocultures, this is considered a curse. It resists control, refuses to die neatly, cannot be mechanized out of existence. But in regenerative agriculture, permaculture, and backyard food systems, this is a gift. It means food security. It means you never start from zero. There's more. The Jerusalem artichoke is resistant to most common pests and diseases. Few insects find the tubers palatable, and the towering stalks deter many small mammals. The leaves are coarse and slightly bitter, acting as natural deterrents against grazing. While no crop is invulnerable, the sunchoke comes close, needing no chemical armor to protect its yield. In terms of caloric return, it rivals and often exceeds potatoes when left to mature through an entire growing season. A single plant can produce several pounds of tubers, especially if given full sun and minimal competition. But even in suboptimal conditions, it still produces something. That, in itself, is a survival trait. It refuses to fail entirely. What's more, it functions as a carbon sequester. Its tall stalks and expansive leaf surface area absorb CO2 during peak growing season, storing energy underground and contributing to the soil's organic matter. This is not a short-term benefit. Over successive years, as the plant spreads and deepens its root network, the soil becomes darker, richer, more alive. Earthworms return. Mycorrhizal fungi reappear. The land breathes again, and the plant asks for nothing unnatural in return. No nitrogen fertilizer, no hybrid seed, no rotating sprays of insecticide or herbicide. Its needs are biological, not chemical. Sunlight, patience, and room to grow. Yet despite all this, it's not widely cultivated. Why? Because it does not conform. It grows too well. It refuses tidy rows. Its tubers are awkward to process in machines. Its yield varies depending on when and how you harvest. And it defies the golden rule of modern agriculture: control. You cannot own the Jerusalem artichoke in the conventional sense. Once it's in the soil, it belongs to the earth. It multiplies without permission, returns without purchase, and spreads without oversight. It is, in a sense, a rogue food, a mutinous plant in a world that demands order and commodification. Its flavor profile also resists simple categorization. Raw, it is crisp like water chestnut, with hints of nuttiness and sweetness. Roasted, it deepens into something akin to artichoke heart and hazelnut with earthy overtones. Fermented, it becomes tangy and probiotic rich. But it is not a blank canvas like white rice or white bread. It retains its character. It insists on being known. Even in its digestion, it reminds us of its power. The same inulin that feeds the gut can, if consumed in excess or introduced too rapidly, cause gas and bloating. It is a plant that demands respect, a slow integration into the diet, not instant adoption. In this way, it reflects the broader challenge of food reconnection. We must relearn the rhythms of ancient nourishment. In every characteristic, from its nutrient profile to its agronomic stubbornness, the Jerusalem artichoke resists simplification. It is not a trend, it is not a miracle food. It is an old friend returning after a long exile, offering us what we forgot to value: endurance without dependence, nourishment without extraction, and abundance without control. It thrives not in the spotlight of industrial fields, but in the margins, the overlooked corners, the forgotten places. And perhaps that is where our future lies too, not in new inventions, but in old roots, not in controlling nature, but in collaborating with it. The Jerusalem artichoke, with all its awkward shapes and uncompromising nature, may be precisely the kind of food that this uncertain century needs. The story of the Jerusalem artichoke's decline is not a tale of failure, but of incompatibility. It did not vanish from fields and markets because it couldn't feed us, but because it could too well. In a world increasingly shaped by industrial farming, commodification, and centralized control over food systems, its strengths became liabilities. Its resilience became unruly. Its abundance became suspect. To understand this disappearance, we must first recognize the fundamental shift that took place in agriculture during the 19th and 20th centuries. Farming, once a patchwork of regional knowledge and community-driven practices, was steadily transformed into an industrial enterprise. Crops were no longer evaluated solely on their ability to nourish people or restore land, but on how efficiently they could be grown, harvested, processed, and sold on a massive scale. The Jerusalem artichoke never fit into this machine. It resisted neat rows and clean harvests. Its tubers grew at unpredictable depths and in irregular shapes, making them difficult to standardize. No combine harvester could easily scoop them from the ground without damage. Unlike corn or soy, which matured in tidy unison and could be processed by massive equipment, the Jerusalem artichoke remained stubbornly natural. Its very biology ran counter to the streamlined logic of industrial efficiency. It also refused uniformity. One plant might produce 10 tubers, another 25. Their sizes would vary, their placement unpredictable. This variability, celebrated in traditional biodiverse farming systems, was a nightmare for industrial processors who needed consistency above all. Every irregularity was an inefficiency. Every refusal to conform became a justification to cast it aside. Meanwhile, the economics of seed ownership were transforming the landscape. Companies began to invest in hybridization, patenting seeds that farmers would need to purchase annually. Seed saving, once a sacred community-based practice, was gradually criminalized or discouraged. Crops were bred for sterility, compliance, and dependency. The Jerusalem artichoke, which could reproduce endlessly from a single tuber and required no annual replanting, posed an economic threat to this emerging paradigm. It could not be owned, controlled, or replaced yearly. It offered food without dependency, and in that, it became subversive. Its nutritional profile, once a strength, also became a wedge. The high inulin content, while beneficial for gut health and blood sugar regulation, was unfamiliar to industrial processors. It did not lend itself easily to existing supply chains built around corn syrup, refined starches, and shelf-stable fillers. You could not mill a Jerusalem artichoke like wheat. You could not extract sugar from it like sugar beets. You could not scale it into soda and snack food the way you could with corn. Instead of adapting the system to accommodate the plant's gifts, the system rejected the plant. Stigma also played a role, a quiet, persistent shaming of the very foods that kept people alive. During periods of war and famine, when wealthier populations turned to industrial imports or rationed staples, the poor relied on what grew locally, abundantly, and freely. The Jerusalem artichoke was one of those survival foods. In France, it was so closely associated with the Nazi occupation during World War II that it became a symbol of poverty and humiliation. People ate it not by choice, but by necessity, and afterward they sought to distance themselves from those memories. It was too painful to embrace a food that had been tied to hunger, fear, and national trauma. Even in North America, where its roots stretched back thousands of years, the plant was gradually rebranded as backwards, wild, or rustic. As indigenous agricultural systems were violently dismantled and replaced by settler monocultures, the crops associated with those systems were erased or devalued. Corn was assimilated and commodified, stripped of its sacred context. Other crops, like amaranth and Jerusalem artichoke, were left behind, viewed as relics of a primitive past that didn't fit into the commercial future. Restaurants and food writers largely ignored it. When they did mention it, it was often accompanied by backhanded compliments, earthy, quirky, and acquired taste. Occasionally, it was rediscovered by chefs experimenting with rustic cuisine, but it never received the sustained support needed to return it to regular tables. There was no marketing board for Jerusalem artichokes, no multinational corporation pushing its adoption. It remained what it had always been, a crop for those who remembered, or who stumbled upon it by accident. Compounding all of this was the gradual loss of agricultural memory. As small farms vanished and knowledge was no longer passed from parent to child, the skills required to grow and harvest perennial crops faded. Farmers trained in conventional systems were taught to till, spray, and replant. Few knew how to work with a plant that returned on its own, that asked them to collaborate instead of control. Agricultural education shifted toward chemical inputs, mechanical efficiency, and scale. The quiet rhythms of perennials had no place in that curriculum. Even those who tried to bring the Jerusalem artichoke back into the conversation often faced logistical barriers. Because the plant spread so easily, many governments categorized it as invasive. In some regions, regulations restricted its planting near waterways or agricultural zones. It was feared not for its fragility, but for its strength. In a world where most crops require coddling, irrigation, fertilization, and constant intervention, here was a plant that thrived on neglect. That very resilience made it dangerous to the fragile architecture of modern agriculture. Meanwhile, the industrial food system continued to reward fragility. Crops that die without chemicals, that can be broken down into profitable ingredients, that lock farmers into annual cycles of purchase and debt. The Jerusalem artichoke, in contrast, offered freedom. It grew without needing a trip to the seed store. It regenerated without fertilizer. It restored the land instead of depleting it. But these qualities did not fit the business model. They challenged it. So the plant was quietly dismissed, not banned outright, but omitted, not criminalized, but neglected. It became an agricultural ghost, visible only to those who knew where to look. It slipped through the cracks of a system designed to reward conformity and compliance. And yet, it never stopped growing. And so we return to the question, why don't you know about it? Because knowing about it leads to wanting it. Wanting it leads to planting it. Planting it leads to freedom. Freedom from seeds you must buy, from chemicals you must apply, from systems that profit from your dependence. That kind of freedom isn't profitable to those who build cages. And so the root was buried, not just in soil, but in silence. But that silence is cracking. The climate is changing. The land is waking, and the people are remembering. There are tubers still growing in forgotten gardens, still thriving beside rivers, still waiting in the margins for someone to notice, for someone to dig deep enough to find them. You don't need permission to plant one. You don't need a license or a loan. You need only curiosity, patience, and a piece of earth. So consider this your invitation, to remember what was forgotten, to listen to the land, to grow something that refuses to die. The Jerusalem artichoke isn't just a crop, it's a story, and it's your turn to tell it. Dig, plant, share, preserve, because the future might just be underground, hiding in the roots we chose not to see.